In the field of oceanography, there's a verse in the Quran, in Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 53 says that He has let two bodies of flowing water, one sweet and palatable and the other salty and bitter. Though they meet, they will not mix. There is a barrier which is forbidden to be trespassed. After science has advanced, we have come to know that whenever one type of water flows into the other type of water, it loses its constituents and gets homogenized into the water it flows. This today science calls as the transitional homogenizing area, which the Quran refers to as barzakh, as a barrier.
In France this week, they passed a law that you cannot wear the burqa. Now, I know you feel, as I do, it doesn't really matter what you wear, but just speak a little about what goes on in the schools of...
Right. I mean, I think, as you imply, there are much worse things than the clothes you wear. A couple of months ago, I visited a British Islamic school, one of the best in the country, and the headmaster was a leading Muslim in Britain. And I spoke to about 6 of the girls. Only the girls and boys are kept strictly separate, of course. And I learned that every single pupil in that school did not believe in evolution. And the pupils that I spoke to quite clearly think that the Quran is a superior source of scientific information than evidence. And they told me, for example, that salt water and fresh water don't mix. The reason? Because it says that in the Quran. Now, alas, I lacked the presence of mind to turn to the teacher sitting next to me and say, will you please, at the very next science lesson, get some salt water, get some fresh water, and mix them and see what happens?
Well...
And my guess is that even if she did that, and sure enough they would mix, they still would believe the Quran, because the Quran takes precedence over fact, evidence.
Whether water is salt or fresh, shit floats. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Please stay around for overtime. Richard Dawkins.
Do you want me to go ahead and start?
Yeah, I think that we pretty much agreed on the terms, the format, and everything. So I'm very happy for you to present me with a scientific miracle in either Hadith or Quran.
Okay, well, the first one will be inside chapter 55, verse 19 through 20. So if you go to examinethetruth.com/proof, you can scroll down to it. And it says over here, it is he who has let loose the 2 seas meeting together. Between them is a barrier which none of them can transgress. Now, the question is here, what does science agree with this, that there is a barrier in the seas? And that's absolutely right. In fact, science calls this the picnic line. And I'm just going to quote from the barrier zones in the ocean by Emiliev, chapter 9. It says, in the seas where the picnic line there is a distinct feature, it is a barrier which prevents deep water from mixing with surface waters. Now, the question I have for you is, well, the choice of words used in the Quran, which agrees with modern science. Now, that in itself doesn't, as I made it very clear, doesn't make it a miracle, because, you know, we could pass it off as a coincidence. But if you see this happening over and over and over again, now that can't be a coincidence. So anyways, can you go ahead and answer that question which I posed to you?
Yeah, okay. So, first thing I suppose to do is if you define what you mean by a barrier.
The word there, Arabic word is barzakh, and it literally translates to barrier. And science is also saying, yes, there are barriers in the seas, which is a picnic line.
Okay, so am I correct then in if is your claim that there are 2 seas and between them there is some kind of barrier, and the 2 seas, neither of them move across the barrier?
Okay, now when you talk about neither of them move across this barrier, the Quran doesn't go into that kind of specifics. But I don't think you answered my question. I asked the question, well, the choice of words used in the Quran. Now, again, that doesn't make it miraculous just by this one fact alone. But well, the choice of words used in the Quran, which agrees with modern science.
Well, we're still at the stage where we're trying to determine what the words are that were chosen. So my question is a barrier between 2 waters something that the water does transgress across the barrier into the other sea, or doesn't?
Oh, I think. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Am I coming in?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I might have a bad connection here. Yeah, as I mentioned on my website, what kind of barrier this is, whether it is a, this is the kind of barrier that is like translucent or allows some kind of mixing, that's irrelevant. That is completely irrelevant to the to the issue which I'm bringing up. And you're saying that we are trying to determine what words are used there. I'm giving you the words. I'm going to give it to you again. The word for barrier in Arabic is barzakh. And what science today tells us is that, yes, there are barriers in the sea. Now, what kind of barriers, I think, is irrelevant. The issue here, which you cannot run away from here, is that, yes, a choice of words was used in the Quran, which does agree with modern science.
Okay, so I won't repeat the question on what the definition of the barrier is, whether it allows the transition of waters between or not. What I want to know is, what are these two waters? Which specifically two seas are these?
Okay, so you're asking what are these two seas, right?
Yeah, the Quran.
What kind of barrier?
No, the Quran says the two seas. So I want to know what the two seas are.
Yeah, no, that information is not given, and again, that is irrelevant. These are all irrelevant questions, to the topic. The issue here is that a choice of words was used in the Quran, which science agrees. And let me just read to you something else which science says on it. What kind of seas, or what are those two seas? I think is just irrelevant, and I think you need to at least accept here that, yes, a choice of words was used in this situation. Let me just read to you what it says here. The picnic line is an invisible boundary. That's what the Maryland C. Grant College tells us. The picnic line is the boundary between layers of waters of different densities. Now, I could ask them, but you didn't define what are those waters? What are those seas? Of course, those are very, absurd questions to be asking the scientists. So my point here, and I'm ready to move on to the next point, I think it's clear that, yes, the Quran did use a choice of words which agreed with science. So I'm ready to go on to the next issue.
Okay.
Before we move on...
No, we're not going to move on. First thing I want to say is from the book that you quote, which talks about the barrier between the two seas, The Barrier Zones in the Ocean by E.M. Emelianov, Chapter 9, page 287. In the Baltic Sea and Fords, the Nordic seas, it is a barrier which prevents deep waters from mixing. That's what you quote on your website.
Yes.
Three pages later in the same book, it says, in seas such as the Baltic and Black Seas, the picnic line acts as a tight lid to cover and isolate deep waters. However, this lid is not capable of preventing water movement and component exchange. In the winter season, severe storms are responsible for cooling and mixing of the upper layers of water, with the result that the picnic line may disappear. In such periods, the water exchange across the barrier increases to values as large as 1 to 2 orders of magnitude. So this barrier that you're describing, that an all-powerful entity has created, seems to break if it gets a bit cold.
I guess you're asking me is, why did the barrier break and why is it mixing? Is that what you're asking me?
No, an all-powerful being
hello, you there?
created a barrier between two waters and thought this was so good that he would mention it completely out of any kind of context whatsoever, even though the barrier is really rubbish, because as soon as it gets cold, the barrier breaks.
Okay, I think you're going back to the issue of, what type of barrier are we talking about? You're getting into the issue of the waters mixing. These are all irrelevant issues. I think due to the the time frame that we are in. I want to move on very quickly. I said all I wanted to say on this issue.
You can't just come on, make a claim, then tell me my answer's irrelevant, and then decide to move on. There's still some additional points. In the Quran 1860, apparently Moses will not cease until he reaches the junction of the two seas. I don't know if Moses was going swimming underwater in the Baltic Sea at the time, but the Quran says that he won't cease until he reaches them. In the next one, 1861, he did actually reach the junction, and at that point they forgot their fish. And then in 1862, they actually continued past the two waters. So it's a bit of a confusing phenomenon if we're actually talking about a barrier underneath the water between the Baltic and the Black Sea. If Moses went there, presumably underwater, because he went to the point of the junction of the two seas, which is underwater, they reached there but didn't have any fish, and then they carried on past it, which I presume would be further down under the ocean. If they're going to have to go down the ocean to meet the barrier, they'll have to continue going down through the ocean to pass it, wouldn't they?
Well, you know, I just don't see what the information you're giving, though it's interesting, I just don't see how it's relevant. And I would like to move on now to the next point. I said all I wanted to say on this topic. Okay, I think I've made my point, and if you feel like you've made your point, that's fine. I'd like to move on to